You're listening to Scaling Up Services, where we speak with entrepreneurs, authors, business experts, and thought leaders to give you the knowledge and insights you need to scale your service-based business faster and easier. And now, here is your host, business coach Bruce Eckfeldt.
Are you a CEO looking to scale your company faster and easier? Check out Thrive Roundtable. Thrive combines a moderated peer group mastermind, expert one-on-one coaching, access to proven growth tools, and a 24/7 support community. Created by Inc. award-winning CEO and certified scaling up business coach Bruce Eckfeldt, Thrive will help you grow your business more quickly and with less drama. For details on the program, visit eckfeldt.com/thrive. That's ECKFELDT.com/thrive.
Welcome, everyone. This is Scaling Up Services. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. And our guest today is Elise Keith, and she is co-founder of Lucid Meetings. She's author of Where the Action Is, the meetings that make or break your organization. She's known as the Meeting Maven. I'm excited about this, to geek out on meetings and meeting discussion and how to make more effective meetings and how to make sure that people are using meetings in the right way, the right port in the organization. With that, Elise, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so thrilled that you're ready to geek out on meetings.
I think there's some stats out there that, there's something like 50 million meetings happening every day in the US or something. I should figure out what it is. During this episode, there'll be some millions of meetings happening, and I'm sure not all of them particularly well run. So hopefully we can talk a little bit about how to help people with meetings. But before we dig into meetings, let's learn a little bit more about you, your background, how you became the Meeting Maven. Tell us a little bit of the story.
Yeah, right. Because you don't go to kindergarten and say, when I grow up, I'm going to be a meeting maven, right?
Exactly.
Nobody does this. But I got to say, probably most of us haven't found our passion in a way that we expected we would.
Yeah.
But for me, I went to college, thought I was going to be an artist, found that wasn't going to be the thing. Joined the business world and found myself in lots and lots of meetings, of course. Yeah. Now, coming from an arts background, performing arts specifically, you come from a perspective that you're going to collaborate together to hit a high quality result by a date, right? Like there's just no question that you're going to meet effectively-ish.
Yeah.
It's a lot of drama because, let's be honest, it's, theater and music.
Yeah, exactly. It's the point.
But that's part of the dance. And the assumption that you're all going to pull together and you're going to make this thing happen on this date with quality is it's a given.
Yeah.
And then I joined the software world. And I was continually faced with we can't possibly make that decision now. And you can have time or quality or what are the other three legs of the stool were, but you can't have all three. It's not possible. Yeah. And I'm like, dude, if we're doing Aida, that's an opera. It opens on Friday and there's an elephant. Like, there's just no.
there's no way around that. The story does not work otherwise.
It didn't make sense to me. And as I worked through that world and saw the way that they met all the time, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of great forward momentum happening. And all of that until I had an opportunity to work with international standards organizations, the legal profession, and then worked in a company that brought in really high quality Agile coaches, and we adopted Agile. And in each of those three worlds, they had a way in which they met that was prescribed. Right. Every week we tackle this question together as a group in a 45-minute call, and that decision is made and we go. Right. And when I saw how, even though all of those realms are very different, that when you designed the meetings to achieve your goals, everything changed. They achieved their goals. The drama went away. The confusion about how things worked went away. And when you see that power, boy, you just can't unsee it. You just can't unsee it, and it's everywhere. So you can see it in all of the industries across the spectrum, in all sectors. There are ways in which people meet that are incredibly powerful and help them achieve results that other people can't achieve. So if you go and you read most of the current leadership literature, go read Daniel Coyle's Culture Code or, Brene Brown's Dare to Lead or, any of a number of things. And you'll find that most of them are actually books about meetings at one level or another.
Yeah. Groups of people having conversations, trying to make decisions or trying to, clarify a direction, resolve an issue. Yeah, it's kind of the essence of it.
Right. And these are our values and this is what we're trying to achieve. This is how we meet. because that meeting and designing that meeting with intention is the best way to make sure that what you want to have happen happens.
Yeah. That's why I think it's so important to this audience is that, I think if you look at, different types of businesses, service-based businesses, because, you're just fundamentally dealing with, people involved in the delivery of the value to customers, you just end up in that sort of high meeting kind of frequency and high meeting complexity kind of, if you're to do a little 2x2 matrix here in terms of type of businesses and businesses that are high in meetings. I just think service-based businesses run into this all the time, and they run into inefficiency. I mean, particularly at the leadership team level, as a company grows and scales, getting those meetings right, those strategic meetings, those planning meetings, the quarterlies, the annuals, the monthlies, the weeklies, the dailies, getting that rhythm is so important. Having that checklist and having that process is key to making them work. So tell us about the book. How did the book come about? How have you kind of crafted your position in the meeting space, and tell us more about Lucid Meetings?
Okay. So Lucid Meetings, so we had this red truck moment, right? Like once you're in the market for a red truck, you see them everywhere. And for us, it was the well-designed meeting. And as you mentioned, right, the specific sequence or the cadence of well-designed meetings being just a game changer in terms of enabling growth and scale and cohesion as you develop your businesses. And we say, okay, but so many people are doing this terribly. Why might that be? And because we were software developers, we're like, okay, well, let's create a software platform that, makes it easy to do the right thing, which we did. And, we got our Gartner Cool vendor, and, it's all fabulous and lovely. So Lucid Meetings we have a meeting management platform as one of our core software offerings. Mm-hmm. But one of the things we discovered was that, software is a technology, it's a tool. And like any other tool, you kind of have to have some skills to be able to use it. You don't put my kids behind the wheel of the farm combine or any tractor tool. They're not equipped.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of people coming to us who were trying to have software solve their meeting problem. And then they get kind of frustrated. They're like, well, I've got an agenda, but we still run terrible meetings. And it's like, well, yes, you do. So let's back up here and look at what you're trying to achieve and how meetings are fitting into your business and how many you should be having and all of that. And started doing research and publication and writing and consulting. And after several years of doing that, that's where I finally pulled that together into the book. So that's when that came out.
Got it.
Yeah.
And what's your take? I mean, there's a lot of meeting haters out there, meeting bashing going on out there in terms of, we should just have less meetings, we just shouldn't be meeting anymore. I mean, I guess, what's your do you have a heuristic or a guideline for companies or for leaders inside companies in terms of how many meetings is 2 meetings? How long is a meeting that's gone too long? I mean, what are your kind of heuristics around some of these things?
So I think the key to all of that is a mindset shift right at the beginning, because you're right. Like a lot of people approach meetings as if there should be a simplistic answer, there should be some kind of rule, right? Meetings are a waste of time. Why should I have to deal with them? And you can see this sweep through companies that, especially as they hit that growth curve. Yeah. Like Slack went through a big growth curve and they found that they were meeting all the time and they weren't clear why. So they canceled all their meetings. Yeah. And it's a really common thing to do, but it's like saying, my goodness gracious, we've gotten a little overweight here. Let's stop eating.
Yeah.
and then we'll see if food comes back, but probably we don't need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like that's a great way to encourage the quick everybody run to McDonald's because I'm starving. It's not designed with intention.
Yeah.
So what we found is that in every single industry, there is a sequence of meetings you can design that achieve goals. So the question about how many meetings should you be running and how often and all of that has to do with what you're trying to achieve. And what we found in our research was that, when we looked across all those industries and took out all those patterns, there were 16 distinct types of meetings.
Okay.
And when you learn what those are, like a problem-solving meeting is good for, give you one guess, solving problems, right? It's not a great meeting for brainstorming. It's not a great meeting for, contract negotiation or building trust and, goodwill with your company as its primary goal. Its goal is to solve a problem.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of the problems are that people are just not using the right kind of meeting format or meeting structure to accomplish the goal. Or probably some of the problem is they don't even have the goal, but assuming they have a goal is them picking the right structure to use to effectively address the goal from a meeting format point of view.
Absolutely. And then once you can see that there are these distinct types of meetings, right, then you can put them together in sequence. It's a puzzle. So you talked about the strategic meeting rhythm. Mm-hmm. So this is a thing that, leadership teams adopt that help them figure out how to set their strategy. And then once they've got a strategy, how to make sure that they're executing towards that strategy, not just executing in general.
Yep. Yeah.
And that strategy stays fresh, right? So exactly. as they learn more about the universe, they understand that strategy gets, put into line with what they now believe about the universe. Mm-hmm. And there's a very specific sequence of meetings you can run at a very specific time and date. And all together, like one of the most popular downloads on our website is a packet that says, here's how to run those 4 meetings exactly and how long they should take. And we find when people pick that up, they will go from doing things like, we hate meetings, so we only have one meeting with our leadership team every 3 weeks, and it goes for 5 hours, and we hate each other.
Oh my God, yeah, I would too.
Or, but they're trying to reduce meetings, so they only do one, and it's long. And we see teams that meet in and out every day, all day. Yeah. They pick up this pattern, and I'm sure you're familiar with the pattern very much like that. And they find that they're using less than 10% of their work time to set their strategy and manage to that strategy. Mm-hmm. So well designed in sequence, it's incredibly efficient and enormously powerful because you're no longer guessing, right? You're no longer guessing, how are we going to decide what to do?
It's interesting. You mentioned Agile before, and I think that there's a principle that I will often use when I'm working with, with leadership teams on their meeting schedules, and they kind of complain about, we do a quarterly or we do a monthly meeting, and it's really hard. We don't like it, so we don't want to do monthlies anymore. We just want to do quarterlies. And I kind of tell them the story of Agile and kind of the principle of, if something is hard and difficult, you should do it more often. Meaning that you're part of the problem is that because it's, if you just push it off, if you're releasing code once a month and it's hard and painful, and you decide you're only going to release code once a quarter so that you don't have to go through that pain, you're kind of burying the problem. You're just pushing the problem off. And instead, you should be releasing code, every week or every day, and forcing yourself to get better at it. And I think the same thing is true with these meetings, is that if meetings are hard, you should do them more frequently, shorter, but with more intention and more focus and more clarity, because that's what's going to drive meeting performance is doing it more frequently, and that's going to force you to be better at it. And I think it's a concept that I kind of pulled over from Agile into the leadership team work that I do. I'm just kind of curious, and because I know you've got some software background, do you see sort of similarities in that kind of process improvement philosophy in the meeting practices?
Well, absolutely. And I think it's, so you take that same one, and it's common in Agile, right? So you've got a daily or at most a weekly check-in in the Agile teams. Because anytime where your interdependence is high and the rate of change is high, you need to exchange information more often. Yeah. So, there are times when you can go a month or 2 months, but that's when you're doing international committee work. Yeah. you don't actually work together, and you don't actually care if the project's done for 3 years, right?
Well,
that's when you can afford that.
Yeah, and I think you hit it, which is what is the pace of change, or what is the rate of change, either that the environment or the context that you're operating in, or that you want to be driving. And the faster you want to change, the more you want to meet. I have leadership teams that do daily huddles. I mean, they're doing 5-minute stand-ups with the whole leadership team, if not every day, at least 2-3 times a week.
We do that. We do our daily huddle as an asynchronous huddle. So there are other ways. Once you realize the function of that, you can move it around. So you can design it to work for your environment. So in our case, we're a remote team, and we do ours in our our chat app, and everybody checks in. Yep. But we don't lose that cadence. We don't lose that check-in rhythm. So when you look in that with that speed of innovation idea, in other domains, if you go look at people who are doing emergency response or tactical military work, they have an action review process, which anybody who's done software will know is a retrospective.
Yep.
And the more intense the situation, the more often they'll run them. So there are teams that will run their action reviews hourly.
Yeah. Just looking at what happened over the last hour. What do we learn? What do we need to do differently? How do we reorient?
Yeah. And, it's a 5-minute meeting, but if you want to rapidly learn and impact change, you don't meet less.
Yeah.
You meet more with greater intention, greater focus, and greater skill. But even on the customer service perspective, right? So what's easier, right? Selling to a customer that's already bought from you or selling to a new one? Engaging a customer, re-engaging a customer you've lost touch with, or having a great conversation with a customer you talk with on a regular basis?
Yeah.
I think probably in the coaching world, right? If you've got coaching clients that you don't talk to every 2-3 months, that's probably a more challenging situation than the coach's clients you have a weekly check-in with.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Right? That rate of well-designed meetings makes a big difference.
Yeah. Well, and you talked a little bit about doing asynchronous meetings and stuff like that. And I think there's the idea that once you get good, or once you kind of figure out the basics, there's lots of ways that you can kind of evolve and adapt and, kind of change the formats to fit your situation. I generally suggest to most of the teams that I'm working with is that we kind of start with the basics. we start with the base model, and then we can kind of build up the options. It's kind of a shoo-ha-ree, approach to meetings. Like you need to learn the basic moves, and and those in martial arts know the shoo-ha-ree. It's like you need to learn the basic moves, and then you put them together in patterns, and then you can start figuring out new combinations that maybe are unique to situation stuff. But getting the basic agendas right, getting the basic process right, getting people trained. I talk about training people on meetings, and then once they figure that out, then you can start to do the after action reviews. You do the retrospectives. You do the process improvement, figure out how to make them better and evolve your particular mode. But you have to understand those principles first.
Well, so that's completely true. And what we found, one of the things we did research into while we were writing the book was what were organizations doing that were really, really successful with their meetings, and what did that look like as they became more and more successful. So basically we outlined kind of a performance maturity model.
Ooh, nice.
And, there's a free diagnostic on our website, so you can go and take it and, see how your organizational practices line up with, the best of the best in the world. But the reality is that while the farther up you get into executive and leadership kind of roles, the more likely it is that you'll spend most of your time meeting at work, right?
Yeah.
Like meetings are how leaders lead.
Yep.
Most of the time. But fewer than 25% of the folks in the leadership capacity in the U.S. at least have any training of any kind.
Yeah. Every business MBA student should have a course designed for how to design and run effective meetings.
Absolutely. It's sort of a weirdly criminal sort of oversight, isn't it? We're going to have all of our leaders spend all of their time doing this, but we shan't train them. And we do know that half of that time is totally wasted. Can you imagine if any of our other production processes had a margin of error of 50% or greater? We were just like, sure, yeah, let's go for it. No problem. Yeah, but that's what it is. So often when an organization actually goes, oh, wow, we need to do this, and they come to work with us, we do a quick start process, which is very much about okay, let's figure out where you are, map out your meetings in a way that you start to see them for the system they are, as opposed to, having that doom loop oriented gut reaction of, meetings are a waste of time or I have to fix my meetings. Start to look and see, oh, wait a second, the meeting I'm having with my clients is a very different thing than the meeting I have with my team, which is very different from the meetings I'm having with vendors. And then, take some skills, training, and begin to design those key pivot points.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I think once you get onto it and seeing what those systems are, you can pick up off the shelf whole meeting designs for soup to nuts. Here's how we go from point A to point B on this kind of business process as a starting place.
Yeah.
And just start with something somebody else got great.
Yeah. I basically have templates for leadership teams looking for strategy development and strategy execution that breaks down the 3-year meeting, the 3-year planning meeting, the annual planning meeting, the quarterly planning, the monthly, the weekly, and the daily. And I just give them the library. I just say, here are the agendas you're going to start with. And we're not going to do them all at once. Like we start with the 3-year plan, and then we go to quarterly, and then I'll do an annual, and then I'll train them monthly, and then we'll go weekly, and then we'll do daily. So I kind of titrate them in, but there is a standard set that they start with because it's a system. I mean, I like that idea that you mentioned, that it is part of a rhythm, part of a system that has logic, has intention, and each one is quite different. And there's very specific things that you do and do not do in each one of those meetings.
Absolutely. That's awesome. We have an online gallery of all kinds of templates like that. You should work with us.
Yeah.
And help us. We'll spread some of your particular genius on that.
Well, it's fascinating because what I find is, having been coming from the agile world and kind of learning that discipline of the iteration process and backlog and the daily stand-ups, it just impressed upon me sort of the system nature of it. But you can apply that to any particular kind of context or situation, whether it's a software team looking to deliver programming code, or whether it's a production team, a marketing team, a leadership team. Like, it's just getting clear on what are you trying to deliver, what is the system you're trying to put in place, what are the touch points, where do you need to get on the same page, where do things go, where do you need alignment, where do you need clarity, where do you need to prioritize, and just then figuring out how those meetings are going to solve each one of those problems, and making sure you're clear on what each one is. I
think that's entirely true. And if it's okay, I can give an example, because we ran into this recently. So we were, from a software perspective, we have, like I said, we do services and we do training and we do publications and all of that, but we also have this meeting management platform. And we found that it was hard to get through some of the enterprise pilot processes, because when you get into selling software in the enterprise world, you're dealing with 97 committees with their, the business brings you in to solve this one problem, but IT says this and procurement says that, and Sally in accounting doesn't like the color, whatever it is. So there's this giant circus of monkeys to manage through success. So we stepped back and we said, well, hold on a second. We're the meeting design company. Let's look at what needs to happen across that pilot process in terms of understanding how the decisions get made, making sure that we're staying on top of issues, making sure everybody feels supported, and that we're moving towards a place of success for everybody. And we designed a meeting flow for that laid out the 10 meetings we need to have and which sequence, how often over a 4-month period, and designed each one of those meetings.
Yeah.
And now when a client comes to us, they can say, well, what will this look like? And who do I need to be involved? And how do I need to plan for my time? And we can say, these are the conversations we're going to have in this order. Here's what your team needs to commit to. We need you to be able to make these kinds of decisions, and we're starting from a completely different place than when you walk in and you say, well, hey, let's go.
Yeah.
Work it out.
Give me your credit card number. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's incredibly powerful because it's very, very clear, and we never lose touch with exactly how that process is going and how they're making their decisions and how we need to adapt.
Yeah. Well, and I think that idea that meetings fit into some kind of process design is key. And I think on the sales process, I think is fascinating, just because I think half of, if not 90% of the sales process really is about educating the customer on how to buy, because typically they don't know how to purchase the thing that you're trying to sell them. So, you can talk benefits all you want, but if you haven't coached them on, what to think about, what data they need to collect, who they need to have involved, what are the criteria they're going to use to make a decision, what does their time frame look like that's the bulk of sales. And I could see having a good set of meetings designed to really have the right conversation at the right time, given a process flow that you've designed, is how you're going to be successfully, not only successfully converting or getting through the sales process, but managing it from a cost of sales point of view to make sure that you're not just dumping huge amounts of money and time and energy into sales, particularly around selling things to people that don't need them or are not going to be successful clients ultimately.
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing that's really fabulous about having a defined way and this is the thing, right? When you define your meetings, what you're defining is the way that we do things. Yeah. Which essentially means that you are defining your culture, you're defining your approach to engaging each other as teams and engaging the world. But when you define the way, you can then have a place where as you learn going forward, you can adapt and make changes. So you're not winging it from first principles every time, right? So in our kickoff process, we have pulled in techniques that are from cognitive and behavioral economic philosophy that make those much more powerful meetings. And we had a place to pull those in as soon as we learned those techniques, right? We weren't like, oh, hey, here's a great idea. We're like, oh, there's a great idea that I can apply in my process right here, right now.
Yeah.
So that was really, really powerful because I've got a thing to work on. But from a scale perspective, the other thing that's incredibly powerful about it is that I can pull on a new account manager and say, this is how you run these meetings.
Yeah.
And they're, like I can scale my team so much faster because I have a way to bring them into. And that's huge because you just don't want to trust or just leave how everybody new in your company talks to your customers or treats your employees to chance.
Yeah. And I think that's the secret to, most of these companies that are struggling to figure out how to scale, they get to a certain point and then they they hit a ceiling. And oftentimes it's because they've got some bottleneck where some person, is the holder of that piece of information or the holder of that process and it's all in their head. And, until they figure out how to unpack that and get that into a defined process and a defined set of agendas and meetings and steps, timeframes, you're just not going to move. You're not going to move that through that constraint, right? That is going to be a gating constraint for the growth of the business. And if you can start to figure out how to put these things in place. The other thing too that I think is really important is, having those meetings well documented, having the agenda and the process documented. It's almost impossible to do process improvement on these kind of activities, on kind of knowledge work, without having some kind of, this is the way we do it. And then we can reflect back on, okay, well, what's working, what's not, or what outcomes do we have and what were desirable, what were undesirable? Well, what do we do that contributed to that? Well, if we don't have the agenda, if there was no agenda to it, it's nearly impossible to then go back and say, all right, well, let's try it this way, or let's change what we're doing here, or let's ask this question first and then that question, that you have no basis to be able to actually improve in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then once you have that basis, so, you were talking about like establishing that pattern and having that be a leverage for scale, right? And a leverage for improvement. So here's a story from a giant company. So Cisco recently, last 3 years, decided that they were going to pay attention to all the research on performance management, where, you look at everybody's potential and their goals for a year and you do, make them fill out sheets and review them and do their raises back on that. And the research says that just completely doesn't work. So they ditched their performance management system and they said, you know what? We know what works is engagement. We know that employees who trust one another and who are excited about their work, they find it meaningful, they're engaged with the company, outperform the others. So what we're going to do is we're going to work on increasing engagement. And the way that they found that worked was they implemented a process for managers to have one-on-ones with every team member once a week using 2 specific questions. And because they had 2 specific questions and they had a system for doing those and they could measure whether or not the team leaders had those one-on-ones, they were able to see that, yes, indeed, when they had that one-on-one with those 2 questions, engagement went up, performance went up. So they scaled it and they said, okay, now if you're going to be a team leader, you have to do this at least 90% of the time. Mm-hmm. So they now had a thing that they can put a performance metric around it, right? Meeting performance is job performance. And then they were able to roll it out and increase engagement across 15,000 teams globally because they had a well-designed meeting as the core of how that worked.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I mean, it's kind of one of those cases of when something is so simple, like it appears so simple, you appreciate how much work was put into getting those questions right.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm sure there were 150 questions that they went through to find the 2 that were most effective. So, it's really about getting the questions right and making the meeting actually quite simple. But simple in the right way that's really going to drive the results that you want.
Right. Absolutely. And, obviously they had to keep it simple because 15,000 teams, right? But that doesn't mean, in any one particular environment, that's exactly the way you ought to do it. But it's sure a useful place to start.
Yeah, exactly. So let's sneak in one more question around virtual teams, because I think this is one thing that I see coming up a lot for companies who are distributed, who have people in multiple locations, and they're doing all this, using some kind of technical platform. Any best practices or anything that you've seen that has been particularly effective for teams that are in that format? Because I know that is a particular challenge, and I know it's coming up, I think, more and more for companies that are, distributed. What are some things that they can do to improve their meetings from a virtual, when they're doing virtual teams and virtual meetings?
So when you go remote, the core remains the same. If you lack basic meeting education skills and you don't have a well-designed meeting in the first place, so you're clear why you're having it, what it's meant to produce, and how to get from point A to point B, you have to start there, right? Basic meeting design is the same requirement in a remote world as it is in an in-person world. But assuming you've got that, let's assume you've got a well-designed meeting and you're trying to adapt it for a remote setting. So there, the key is about expanding your understanding of technology. So there are over 200 companies that build software specifically for online meetings and meeting enablement, and only 20 or 50 of those are things like Zoom and Skype and whatnot that are about communication. Mm-hmm. Most of the rest of them are doing things like giving you technical platforms for doing agendas and minutes and whatnot, which is what our company does, and technical platforms for things like online brainstorming or visual collaboration. So if you're using something like Kanban boards or, service mapping, right? There are technology platforms that allow you to do that with remote teams. So that's a really important thing. If you've got a primarily remote team, make sure you have enough technology to support that.
Yeah.
And then the other one is that you will need to adapt things to push more of the work you're doing into writing. Mm-hmm. And that may mean more pre-work, but it also means that in the meeting, you want to have people writing together in real time while you're talking. Because first of all, that gets them, they're going to be multitasking. There's just no way around it, right? You can't like hello. Yeah. It's like, we're talking here. I'm like, hey, I want to kind of look up that template real quick, So how do you get them multitasking on task?
Yeah.
And one of the ways you do that is you give them a job to do. So note-taking, pulling up research, contributing ideas in writing, all of that is one of those ways that you both get people more deeply engaged, but also increase the richness of what you're creating together so that you've got a better institutional memory for what happened there.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing. So you gotta broaden your technology library, get people multimodal engaged in what you're doing, and then keep the sessions shorter.
Yeah, good suggestions.
Sucks otherwise. It's just no fun.
Yeah, I do. I find that it's about 2 hours. We can do them in 2-hour stints, and then you got to take a half-hour break. As just people fade, there's a technology overhead fatigue that sets in. So I run 8-hour meetings with the team in person, and we can keep the energy pretty high, but about 2 hours online, and then we got to take a break and come back to it.
And what's fascinating about that, so we did a series of templates on doing strategic planning as a remote team. Mm-hmm. Right? And strategic planning isn't something you do in an hour and a half. It's just not. So in that series of templates, what we did is we broke it into 4 2-hour meetings. Yeah. And what was really fascinating about that, I'm not sure I'll go back to doing full day in-person strategic planning. Because what happens is when you've got, like, let's say you do your visioning as your first unit, you create your big story and you do your vivid vision work and whatnot. And then you go away for 3 days. Well, what happens in that 3 days? Yeah. Your whole understanding of that vision and what that means and all of the implications that you then build into the mission or the key results or whatever your thing is that you're doing is radically better. It's radically better. So it takes a week instead of a day, but the result is so much richer.
Yeah, it is. Having done a lot of these virtually now, it's just fascinating playing with the different kind of modes and the templates and how to facilitate an online versus in-person. I think it's a huge area that is yet to be explored, or there's still a lot to be developed. You get cultural differences, time zone differences, like all those become factors that you kind of go into your strategy for planning this. Elise, we're going to run out of time here. This has been a great meeting, a great conversation. So we had a time bound, we had an intention, we had an agenda. If people want to find out more about you, about Lucid Meetings, about the book, what's the best way to get that information?
So our website is lucidmeetings.com, and there is a wonder world of templates and diagnostic surveys and all kinds of tools you can find there, as well as access to the book and the our online school. All of that's there. And then if you are interested in talking specifically to me, my website is jelisekeith.com.
Great. I'll make sure that all of that is in the show notes so people can click there and get those things. Again, Elise, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. A lot of great information here for all of our listeners. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
You've been listening to Scaling Up Services with business coach Bruce Eckfeldt. To find a full list of podcast episodes, download the tools and worksheets, and access other great content, visit the website at scalingupservices.com. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at scalingupservices.com/newsletter.